The grass near the far fence line was pressed flat in places, as though something small had been moving back and forth for days. Mara slowed her steps, scanning the ground ahead, and saw a movement at the base of a rotting log. 3 small fox kits lay close together, their ribs shifting with shallow breaths. Their fur was patchy, each coat marked by the pale dryness of hunger, and their eyes were open but dull. They did not try to run. One lifted its head, then let it fall back against the others. She knelt a few meters away, the dry stems whispering against her trousers. The kits made no sound. Even at this distance, she could see how light their bodies were. Legs too thin to hold them steady for long, tails without the fullness of good health. In the wild, their survival without an adult would be counted in hours, not days. If they stayed here, predators, cold, or thirst would reach them before morning. The air was still, carrying no scent of another fox. Mara knew that sometimes mothers left young for hours while they hunted, but these kits had the flat, unblinking stillness of animals that had been alone for much longer. One of them shifted weakly, pressing its nose against the hollow under the log. The search for scent was instinct, but the absence of response told her what she needed to know. There was no returning parent here. She moved a little closer, careful not to startle them, and placed her pack on the ground. A shallow bowl of water came out first. The kits' noses lifted, a faint tremor in their thin necks. Mara set the bowl down, not touching them yet, and waited. After a minute, the smallest kit crept forward, paws dragging through the grass, and began to drink. The others followed, movements uneven and slow. The sound of their small tongues in the water was quiet, almost lost in the dry whisper of grass around them. Mara kept her voice low. One soft phrase to let them hear her tone. "It's all right." The largest kit glanced up briefly, then bent its head again. The relief of water was visible in the way their bodies loosened, but they were still too thin to travel far. She opened a pouch of soaked meat and tore it into small pieces, setting them near the bowl. The smell drew them forward. Their teeth were sharp, but their bites tentative, pausing between each swallow as if unsure whether more would come. Each movement told her the same thing. They were surviving on instinct, but only just. Their mother's absence was more than a momentary delay. She studied their size, the way their bones pushed against skin, and thought about the coming night. The temperature would drop quickly after sunset. Without the shelter of a den or the warmth of an adult, their small bodies would lose heat faster than they could replace it. The sun had already shifted lower, casting long shadows from the fence posts. Time was narrowing. If she left them here, the risk was certain. If she took them in, there was a chance. Food, warmth, and a controlled environment where they could recover before being reintroduced to the wild. She weighed the quiet grass around her, the empty air, and made the choice. Mara took a folded blanket from her pack, laying it on the ground. She moved slowly, letting them smell her hands. One by one, she lifted the kits, each lighter than expected, and placed them in the center of the blanket. They curled together immediately, eyes half closed. She wrapped the edges loosely around them, enough to hold their warmth without constricting their movement. As she stood, she looked once more toward the tree line. No movement, no flash of russet fur. The log where they had been lying now seemed even more exposed, just a hollow under open sky. She tightened the blanket in her arms and began the walk back toward the small station. Behind her, the grass swayed in the stillness, closing over the place where 3 small shapes had been, leaving nothing but the memory of their faint breathing in the dry afternoon air. The sun was sinking low by the time Mara reached the wildlife station. The blanket of fox kits held steady in her arms. Inside, the light was softer, a single lamp casting a circle across the worn wooden table where she laid them down. The room smelled faintly of hay and disinfectant, a mix of comfort and necessity. She unwrapped the blanket just enough to let their heads peek out. All 3 stayed curled together, their bodies trembling with the chill that came as the day turned. She filled a shallow ceramic dish with fresh water, placing it close to them. The smallest kit lifted its head first, eyes half-lidded, and began to lap at the surface. The others followed slowly, drawn more by instinct than strength. Their tongues moved in short bursts, pausing often as if the act itself was a strain. Mara knew that water was the first need, but food would determine whether they could hold through the night. She soaked small pieces of minced meat in warm broth until they softened enough for easy swallowing. The smell filled the quiet space, and one kit's ears twitched faintly at the scent. She set the pieces down within reach, watching carefully as the largest leaned forward, took one between its teeth, and chewed once before swallowing. The movement was slow, deliberate, a sign of exhaustion as much as hunger. The others followed, each bite an effort, each swallow marked by a visible shiver. "They're doing what they can," she murmured, more to steady her own focus than for any response. She resisted the urge to hurry them, letting the food disappear in uneven intervals, piece by piece. In the wild, meals were often rushed, stolen in seconds. Here, their pace was different, cautious, uncertain, but without competition. The last light of day faded from the small window, leaving the room in the steady glow of the lamp. Outside, night insects had begun their low, constant call, a hum that filled the silence between the soft sounds of feeding. Mara replaced the water with a fresh dish, adding a little more food for those that still showed interest. By now, the kit's trembling had lessened, replaced by the slow, even shifts of animals, finding a brief sense of safety. Still, the signs were clear. Their muscles were weak, their bodies underweight. Any setback, cold, illness, refusal to feed, could push them past recovery. She prepared a lined box in the corner of the room, layering soft cloth and an old fleece to hold their warmth. Lifting each kit gently, she placed them inside, watching as they pressed close together again. One gave a faint whimper, not loud but enough to draw the others nearer. Mara set a covered heat pad beneath the fleece, checking the temperature with the back of her hand before leaving it in place. Warmth, food, and quiet. These were their best chances now. She stayed near them for the next hour, refilling water when needed, removing uneaten scraps, and noting how each responded. The night deepened, and the station settled into stillness. Even the hum of the small refrigerator in the next room seemed loud in the quiet. Mara watched the box, the rise and fall of their thin sides, the way their ears twitched occasionally as they shifted in their sleep. Survival here would not be decided in a single meal, but in the slow accumulation of rest, warmth, and careful feeding. She knew that the hours until dawn were the most dangerous. If their bodies cooled too much, or if exhaustion outweighed their will to eat, the day might begin with loss. She set a chair near the box and sat down, letting her presence be the last thing they sensed before sleep took them fully. The air was warm, the lamp steady, and for now, the kits lay still, gathered against each other under the soft weight of safety. By the third morning, the kits were strong enough to take food without trembling. Mara decided it was time to begin returning them to the place where they had first been found, if only for short periods. She carried a shallow tin of soaked meat in one hand, a bottle of water in the other, and crossed the narrow track that led to the outer clearing. The grass was dry here, brittle underfoot, the log where she had first seen them still resting half buried in the earth. She set the food down on a flat stone, then stepped back a little. The kits hesitated at the edge of the blanket she'd carried them in, their noses twitching at the scent of open air. One stepped forward first, pressing through the grass, followed by the others. They reached the tin together, bending their heads to eat. The sound was soft but steady, the rhythm of small teeth working through softened meat. For the next days, this became the pattern. Morning feedings at the station, then a short walk to the clearing in the late afternoon, carrying food and water. She wanted them to keep a link to the land, to feel the textures and scents of their natural space while still having the safety net of human care. The clearing itself carried little sign of other foxes. The air was still, the soil undisturbed except for the shallow prints the kits made on their daily visits. By the end of the week, Mara noticed how they began to anticipate her arrival. Before she stepped into view, their heads would lift at the faint sound of grass parting. Ears pricked, eyes following the direction of her approach, they would move forward to meet her, paws light over the dry ground. It was a recognition born of consistency, the same steps at the same time each day. The same soft arrival with food and water. Still, the clearing felt incomplete. Even in the warmth of late afternoon, without the cold or hunger pressing against them, there was an absence here. No watchful adult, no protective circle of a mother's presence. In the wild, kits this size would rarely be alone for long. Mara scanned the tree line each visit, searching for movement. Nothing. The log remained only a hollow shelter, good for shade but not for safety. One afternoon, she sat a little longer than usual, letting them finish the last pieces while she kept her eyes on the brush. The smallest kit paused mid-bite, looking toward the trees. Mara followed its gaze but saw only the shifting of leaves in the wind. She reminded herself that scent carried further than sight, and it was possible they smelled something she could not detect. When the bowls were empty, she gathered them again, wrapping them in the blanket and carrying them back. Each trip was the same: quiet feeding, a careful scan for signs of their kind, then the slow walk home. She felt the weight of the routine settling in. It was necessary for their strength, but without another fox to guide them, the path back to full wildlife would be longer and riskier. Evening light painted the station walls when she returned, the kits slipping into their lined box almost without notice. Their bodies were warmer now, coats beginning to fill in, but the work was far from done. Until the gap in their family was bridged, every day outside would carry both promise and risk, and in the stillness of the clearing, the space where that missing figure should be remained unfilled. Morning light filtered through the dry stems as Mara stepped into the clearing, food tin balanced in her hand. The kits were already there, waiting near the old log, ears pricked at the sound of her approach. She set the tin down on the flat stone, and they moved quickly to it, their bodies brushing against one another as they fed. The air was cool, the kind that held scents longer, carrying them deeper into the brush. Mara's gaze drifted past the feeding kits toward the darker edge of the clearing. At first it was only a slight disturbance, a shadow that didn't move with the wind. Then she saw it shift. Low to the ground, the shape paused, almost melting back into the cover of leaves. It was deliberate, controlled, and her breath slowed without her meaning it to. This was not one of the kits. The distance was enough that she couldn't make out detail, only the outline of a fox-sized body. The posture was alert, head forward, tail low. It didn't advance, but it didn't retreat either. The kits seemed unaware, focused entirely on the food, their small jaws working steadily. Mara stayed still, the tin between her and them, her eyes fixed on the figure in the shadows. It shifted again, 2 slow steps forward, stopping where the light from the clearing barely touched its fur. A flash of reddish-brown, a faint glint where the sun caught an eye, that was all. She could feel the balance of the moment, the silent weight of being observed as much as she was observing. The smallest kit lifted its head briefly, turning toward the brush, but then bent back to eat. Either the scent was familiar, or its hunger overrode any caution. Mara's mind kept to the plain fact. If this was another fox, the nature of its interest was still unknown. It could be a potential threat, or something else entirely. She resisted the urge to step closer. Movement now might break whatever fragile boundary existed. Instead, she lowered herself slightly, keeping her profile calm, her breathing steady. The kits continued their meal, unaware of the tension just beyond the grass. Minutes passed. The figure remained, watching. A light breeze shifted the leaves, breaking the shape into fragments of color and shadow. And when the branches settled again, the fox, if it was one, had taken another step forward. The posture held no signs of aggression. The tail did not lash. The ears did not pin. But the distance closed by even a small measure felt significant. Mara's focus split, part on the kits, ensuring they were unharmed, part on the quiet possibility at the clearing's edge. She placed a second piece of meat on the stone, her movements slow and open. One of the kits nudged the other aside and began eating it, oblivious to the eyes that watched from the trees. The moment stretched until, without sound, the figure sank lower and withdrew, vanishing into the darker green. No snap of twigs, no rustle of leaves marked its departure. The clearing seemed to exhale, the stillness returning as though nothing had been there at all. When the kits finished, Mara gathered them in the blanket, scanning the tree line one more time. The space was empty again, but the certainty of what she had seen remained. Something had been there, watching, and it had chosen not to cross the boundary. She turned toward the path, the weight of the kits warm in her arms. Behind her, the trees stood in quiet lines, holding whatever had passed between their shadows. The next morning, the clearing was quiet when Mara arrived. She placed the tin on the flat stone, the familiar routine settling into her movements. The kits emerged from the low grass almost immediately, their coats brighter now, bodies steadier. They began to feed, small paws braced against the stone, heads bent in concentration. A shift in the tree line drew her attention. This time there was no question. The shape from the day before was moving closer, the space between shadow and sunlight narrowing with each step. An adult fox emerged, ribs visible beneath a rough coat, muzzle lifted slightly as it scented the air. Its gait was slow but certain, head held level, eyes fixed on the scene before it. The kits froze. Their bodies went still, ears angled forward, and then came the sound. Faint, high-pitched calls, thin and insistent. They were not the sharp alarms of danger, but something softer, layered with recognition. The adult's ears twitched at the sound, and it stopped a few paces short of the food. The distance between them was only a few body lengths, but the air felt weighted. The balance between approach and retreat finally held. Mara did not move. The bowl of food was still in her hand, its scent carrying easily in the cool morning air. She kept her body low and her eyes on the space between the adult and the kits. Any sudden motion could fracture the moment. The adult's eyes were bright despite its thin frame, each step forward measured. Its sides rose and fell more quickly now, whether from the effort of moving or from the closeness of the young was hard to tell. The kits, still pressed together, gave another series of calls, and the adult's tail gave a single low sweep behind it. Mara could see the ribs clearly now. This was not a fox in good health. Weeks, perhaps longer, without steady food had thinned its muscles, but its focus remained sharp. The scent of the meal between them must have been strong, but it made no direct move toward it. Instead, its gaze shifted from Mara to the kits, holding there as if taking measure of them. The smallest kit stepped forward first, just one pace, and paused. The adult lowered its head slightly, nostrils flaring, then lifted it again. Mara watched the exchange without breaking her stillness. If the adult chose to come closer, the meeting could turn to acceptance or rejection. The risk was plain. If this was not their mother, a stranger could harm them. If it was, the absence of trust between her and Mara could drive her away. Seconds stretched, the quiet broken only by the small scrape of claws against stone as one kit shifted its weight. The adult took one step closer, stopping just outside the reach of the food. Mara eased the bowl forward, setting it down on the grass between them, her hand withdrawing slowly. The scent moved with the light breeze, brushing both fox and kits. For a long moment, nothing changed. Then, with a cautious bend of its legs, the adult lowered its head toward the bowl. The kits remained still, watching, their calls now quiet and irregular. The moment held steady, balanced on the thin edge between fear and something more enduring. Mara stayed where she was, letting the choice remain with the fox in front of her. Whatever happened next would set the course for all of them. The adult fox's head lifted from its stillness, nose working the air in short, deliberate breaths. Each movement forward was silent, the pads of her paws pressing lightly into the grass. She closed the gap to the kits first, not the food, circling them with slow, angled steps. The kits stood where they were, bodies rigid, eyes locked on her. Her tail hung low but steady, not lashing or stiffening, and the set of her ears was forward, attentive rather than hostile. She leaned into the smallest kit, inhaling deeply along its back, then moved to the others. Each received the same measured inspection, a pass of her nose over their heads, down their flanks, a pause at the scent-marked fur near the base of their tails. The kits did not flinch. One let out a faint whimper that carried more relief than alarm. Mara's hands stayed loose at her sides. The food bowl she had placed down sat between them all, the smell drifting upward. The adult's nose twitched toward it, but she completed her circuit before approaching. When she did, it was with a single step forward, her body still angled toward the kits as if unwilling to turn her back fully. She lowered her head and took a small piece from the edge, lifting it away from the others before chewing. It was a slow acceptance. She never claimed the bowl outright. Instead, she fed in short intervals, stepping back often to check the kits, even nudging one closer to the food with the side of her muzzle. The gesture was unhurried but unmistakable, an invitation for them to eat alongside her. They responded cautiously at first, then more readily, pushing their narrow shoulders in beside her. Mara watched the pattern build. This was not the guarded tolerance of a stranger, it was the measured re-establishment of connection. Whether she was their true mother or another female adopting them, the behavior leaned toward protection rather than competition. Her ribs still showed sharply when she moved, but her attention was balanced, feeding enough to restore herself without depriving the young. The light shifted as a thin cloud passed overhead, and for a moment the group seemed suspended in that muted glow. The only sounds were the scrape of small teeth on softened meat and the faint rustle of grass under shifting paws. Mara felt the distance she had kept all these days begin to narrow in meaning, even as she stayed physically still. This was the first clear sign the kits might have a guardian again. When the food was nearly gone, the adult stepped back, licking her muzzle, eyes scanning the edge of the clearing. The kits followed her gaze but stayed close, their bodies brushing against hers in a loose cluster. She allowed their contact without moving away, even leaning down to nuzzle the smallest once more before turning back toward the trees. She did not leave entirely. Instead, she settled just inside the shade, where she could watch both Mara and the kits. It was a position of choice, close enough to intervene, far enough to retreat if needed. Mara let the space hold, gathering the empty bowl but making no move to approach. In the balance between wild and human care, this moment felt like a hinge. The kits had someone to follow now, someone whose scent and movements would teach them the patterns of survival. Whether she stayed for a day or for the rest of the season, the path ahead had shifted. The clearing, once only a place of absence, now carried the shape of possibility. The days that followed fell into a steady rhythm. Each morning and late afternoon, Mara brought food to the flat stone in the clearing. The adult fox was always there now, waiting in the half-shade at the tree line. The kits no longer approached the food first. They moved toward her, pressing briefly against her legs before settling to eat. She accepted their contact with the same quiet composure, standing over them for a moment before lowering her head to feed beside them. Mara kept her distance, placing the bowl down and stepping back. The adult would glance at her each time, a quick measure of intent, before turning to the meal. She never took the first bite without the kits close, and often nudged one forward with her muzzle before starting herself. The food disappeared quickly in those sessions, the sharp sound of tearing, softened meat punctuated by the kit's rapid chewing. When the last pieces were gone, the adult's behavior shifted. At first, she lingered near the stone, watching Mara with a stillness that made it hard to guess her next move. Then, as if some invisible signal had passed between her and the young, she would turn toward the trees. The kits followed without hesitation, their small bodies darting in and out of the grass in short bursts before falling into step behind her. Mara noted the way she adjusted her pace, slowing to keep them close, waiting if one lagged behind. The first time she led them away, Mara half expected they would not return. But the next day, at nearly the exact same hour, the four of them emerged from the same stretch of brush. The adult came first, stopping just at the edge of light, the kit spilling out past her legs toward the stone. This pattern repeated. They would arrive together, eat and leave together, always by the same path. It became clear that the kits had a protector now. The adult was no longer thin from lack of food. Her ribs still showed, but the hollow along her flanks had begun to fill. Her coat, once rough and matted, carried a faint sheen in the sunlight. The kits, too, looked stronger. Tails fuller, movements less cautious, their bodies held higher as they approached the stone. Mara observed the subtler signs of their bond. The kits mirrored her movements, stopping when she froze, tilting their heads at the same angle when she scented the air. They no longer huddled tightly together while eating, but spread out in a loose arc around her, secure in her presence. The adult, in turn, corrected them gently. A nudge here, a brief block with her body there, whenever their energy threatened to scatter their focus. Each departure was the same. A short pause, the adult glancing toward Mara once, then a turn toward the tree line. The kits fell in behind her, disappearing into the layered green without a sound. Mara would gather the empty bowl and stand for a moment, listening for movement, but the clearing always settled quickly into its quiet, as if folding over their absence. The predictability brought a certain ease, but it also marked a shift in her role. They no longer depended solely on her for survival. The wild had stepped back in, and with it came the understanding that their path would soon lead beyond her reach. For now, though, the rhythm held. Food given, bond strengthened, family restored in the soft margins of the clearing. Late in the day, Mara carried the familiar tin of food to the clearing, the air warm with the last light of evening. The path felt the same beneath her boots, the grass brushed against her legs as always, but the space ahead was empty. No shapes waiting by the log, no ears pricked at her approach. She set the bowl on the flat stone and stepped back, expecting any moment to see the four of them emerge from the tree line. Minutes passed. The only movement came from the dry stems swaying lightly in the breeze. She listened for the rustle that usually came before their arrival. The faint sound of paws through grass, but the clearing stayed still. The food sat untouched, its scent carrying into the quiet air without drawing them in. She waited longer, scanning the shadows where the adult often paused before stepping out. The sun dipped lower, throwing a warmer cast over the space, yet the emptiness remained. In the rhythm they had kept for days, this absence was more than a delay. It was a decision. Carrying the bowl in one hand, she walked toward the far edge of the clearing. The grass grew taller there, bending under its own weight. Beyond, the land dipped slightly, opening into a stretch of unbroken cover. It was there she saw them, four shapes moving in an easy, steady line. The adult led, her pace even, the kits following close behind, their smaller bodies threading neatly through the stems. Mara stopped where she was. The distance between them was enough that they gave no sign of noticing her. Their focus fixed on the path ahead. They did not look back. The kits moved with the same assured steps she had seen them practice in the clearing, their bodies no longer fragile, their movements no longer hesitant. She watched until the tall grass closed over them, their shapes fading into the deeper gold of the field. The sound of their passing was light, barely more than the whisper of wind in the stems, and then it was gone. The space they left behind held no trace of them, but the memory of their feeding place and the paths they had worn through the grass. Mara returned to the stone, placing the bowl down one last time, though she knew it would remain full. The clearing was quiet, the light dimming toward the soft blue of evening. Somewhere beyond her sight, they would find their own food now, their own shelter, guided by the one who had chosen to stay with them. She stood for a moment longer, letting the breeze shift across her face, the scent of dry earth and grass carrying lightly. The work here was finished, though the weight of it would stay. When she turned back toward the path, the clearing settled behind her as it had before she came, a place that belonged to them, and now fully to the wild again.